Hello, class, and welcome back to another lesson. So, this particular lesson, I'm hoping and I believe it'll be extremely helpful for a lot of you that are listening or watching because I've had this conversation a lot with one of my close friends, and that's actually where this particular lesson started off. A few weeks ago, I was having a conversation with him actually about you guys, everyone who's watching and listening, and I was asking, what lessons should I teach you all? Because I don't really know, right? Because to be honest, I'm imagining a lot of my students that are listening is very similar to my friend. And my friend is very reserved. He's introverted. He's a very high performer, very smart. He's very book smart, right? Works really hard. And one day when he was struggling to find a job, when he was about to graduate with his PsyD, I was giving him advice about just interviews because I'm pretty good at interviews. To be honest, I actually haven't done a lot of them, but that's because I got jobs quite quickly and I was offered jobs before I ever graduated, or I was just offered jobs. So I really want to share the tips that I have that I told my friend to everyone that's listening or watching. So the question of today is how to feel confident during a job interview. And again, this was inspired with a conversation I had with my friends, and we were just figuring out how I can help everyone that's watching or listening. So let's just dive into it. Okay. So number 1, how to feel confident during a job interview. Have a job already lined up. Now, this might be counterintuitive a bit, but this, I believe, is one of the most helpful tips, which is have a job already lined up. Now, for example, when you're applying for colleges, you're when you're applying for colleges, you apply for quite a bit of colleges. You're applying for your safety schools, quote unquote safety schools, the colleges that you're pretty confident you'll get into. That could be a CC, that could be of a state college, whatever it may be. But you apply to those comfort schools, right? The ones that you're confident in. But you also apply to reach schools, schools that you're not super confident you'll get into, but you know what? You're going to apply nonetheless because you never know. And the same thing could be applied to job interviews. Now, while you're applying for jobs, I'm going to assume this is what most people do. You probably just apply to a bunch of jobs. You apply to regular jobs who from or for companies you're not too familiar with, but you know what? You're going to apply for a job and see what happens. But you also would probably apply to, dream jobs, whether it be working for Google, Twitter, the NBA, NFL, whatever it may be. But you have your dream jobs, right? For companies that are kind of a reach, which is fine. Now, think about going into your dream job or your dream job interview. Now, let's imagine that's your first interview ever, or maybe your first interview for the summer, or whatever it may be. It's your first line of interview, your dream job. How nervous are you? Probably extremely, extremely nervous. Why? Because this is your dream job. You have one shot. You don't have any experience, more or less, right? When it comes to interviewing, and it's kind of like it's now or never. It's a hit or miss. It's either I get it or I don't. Now, you have this pressure, so much pressure building on your shoulders because one, you're probably in need of a job. You need to make payments on your school, or you need to make payments for your living situation. You need to make money, right? Simply put. Now, your dream job, that's your first interview. There's this immense pressure to get the job. There's this immense pressure to get a job, period. So you can live, so you don't get evicted from your apartment, so you don't have to leave, right? There's so many different variables involved. Now, same example, but instead, let's say you got right before your dream job interview, you already did an interview and you already landed a job at a good company. Not a company that you're in love with, but you're pretty happy with. You already interviewed with them and they already offered you a job. But you told them like, "Hey, I appreciate your offer, But one thing I do want to do before I go ahead and accept this offer is I have an interview with Google next week. And I would really like to interview with them. Would you allow me to interview with them before I accept your offer? And they tell you yes. Now imagine going into the Google interview with a job offer already. How would you feel then? You're probably still nervous. Why? Because it's Google, it's your dream job. But the important factor is you're not as desperate. And the problem with a lot of communicators that I notice when it comes to speeches, just having conversations with people, is that feeling of desperation drives them to say things that they normally wouldn't say, or try too hard to be quote unquote professional, try too hard to say the quote unquote right thing. And as a result, during your interview, you come off as inauthentic. You come off maybe even robotic. You come off as just someone that doesn't feel real. You sound like everyone else. You sound like the cookie cutter interviewee. Or yeah, the interviewee. Now, when it comes to jobs, people are hard when it comes to job interviews. When you get to that job interview point, that means you've already met qualifications, right? Now, what's the purpose of a job interview? In my opinion, job interviews are focused on the interviewer seeing whether or not the interviewee is a good fit. And it's similar to kind of like meeting someone, going on a date with someone. We've chatted online, you meet all my requirements, right? You don't smoke, you don't drink, you have a dog, or you like dog, whatever, right? That's the resume submission portion of a. It's similar to that job or that dating profile, right? It's the initial information. But when you meet up for that date, what should you talk about? You should talk about more personal information so the other person can get to know you more to see whether or not you should continue dating and see whether or not this date can turn into a relationship. The same thing applies to an interview. They've already seen your resume or your profile, right? Now they want to get to know you more to see whether or not they can see you working here for long term because they're making a big investment. Companies are making a big investment into you. They're investing whatever the salary is, into you. If the salary is 100K, they're investing 100K into you. So if you're investing 100K into something or someone, ideally you'd want to know as much as possible about this person. And the same thing when it comes to dating, right? If you want to invest for the rest of your life into a person, you want to get to know them. You want to know about them. It's an investment. So again, going back to how to feel comfortable is that to alleviate this robotic, this disingenuine type of persona that you give off, this professional cookie cutter robotic persona, have a job lined up so you don't feel desperate. So you don't feel like, oh, I need to say everything perfectly. Because if you're one of those individuals who I know there are a lot, which is most people, who go into interviews and all they do during an interview is list everything from the resume, you're doing it wrong. If you're going into interview telling the person your age, your degree, what year you graduated, what job you done, if you're just listing information, what's the point? I didn't invite you into an interview so I can hear about the same information I already read on your resume. So again, to feel confident in your job interview, have a job lined up so you don't feel that desperate to say the wrong thing. And this tip helped my friend immensely. So as an example, again, my friend, he just graduated with his ID in the job market, has a lot of money to pay back for a student debt, and he needed a job. And it was heartbreaking because he's like, yo, I'm just applying to everything. I just need something, right? So I told him, I was like, don't you have I know that friend of yours who's in the same cohort as you, or in the same, graduating class as you. Why don't you ask her dad if he needs, like, someone just to, if he's hiring. And then he was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's the first thing you should probably do. You should probably hit up your connections. If your connections don't hit you up, then hit them up." So I told him that, and fortunately, my friend's dad offered him a job, and then now the remaining interviews, his dream job interviews, went a lot smoother because he didn't feel that immense pressure to land every job because he already had that quote unquote safety net. And that's what you're doing. You're creating a safety net so you can avoid that desperate feeling, because when you're desperate, again, you make decisions that you regret. And I think we can all agree. We've been in those positions where we feel very powerless. And when we feel powerless, again, we don't make the best rational decisions possible. We do a lot of things out of character. So the first tip is have a job already lined up. Get a safety net job so you can go into your next interviews and the following interviews just feeling more confident about yourself. And again, get a job that you aren't too emotionally invested in to get that safety net job just there. Because I understand most of y'all, right? Well, depending on the audience. I don't really know who's my audience at the moment because I don't have enough data from my social media accounts, whoever's listening or watching. But have a job already lined up. It'll make you feel so much more at ease going into the following interviews because you're not desperate for the money. You're not desperate for a job. You can just go into the job interview being yourself because that's the ultimate goal. Okay, so hopefully that was clear. I went on a tangent a little bit because I was just in the moment. So I apologize for that, but not really. I kind of liked it. Okay. But nonetheless, let's move forward. How to feel confident during job interviews. Okay, number 2. Have a conversation with the interviewer. And I briefly mentioned this in the previous point. Again, I will put money. I always tell my students, and I'm always right. 90 to 95% of everyone in that room, I already know and can predict how they're going to respond to questions. Which is, what are your greatest, or tell me about yourself. Answer, I'm 30 years old. I have my master's degree in communication studies. I graduated in 20 whatever. I have a nonprofit. I've published so and so books, yada yada yada, blah blah blah, right? You're just listing off information. Now again, going back to that example that I provided earlier. Interviews, it's very similar to going on a date. Again, the date, what's the purpose of the interview? What's the purpose of the date? It is to get to know someone. And how do you get to know someone? You have a conversation with them. You provide detail. You show the person what type of person you are. You don't just tell them. Like, I did this, I did that, I did that. That's when conversations get stale. And then eventually, like, I don't want to talk to this person again. And same thing with interviewers. They more or less don't want to hire people who they can't imagine seeing every day. Because think about it. As, let's say you're a boss. Do you want to hire someone that you don't like, that you have to see every single day? The answer is probably no, I don't want to. So you want to be invested in someone that you care about. You can help them grow. You can watch them grow. You're more willing to invest time and energy into someone who might not be as qualified, but you really thoroughly enjoy being around them. Because if you enjoy being around them, you're happy to invest time, your knowledge, and energy into that person to help and watch them grow because you really, really like their personality. You really like their character. Because good character is hard to find. So, number 2, just have a conversation with them. Don't list information. You are not a robot. And that's what so many people do wrong. And that's what so many high performers do wrong because they're so uncomfortable sharing information about themselves. But that's one of those things you need to understand that you just need to do. You have to open yourself up to people. You have to share stories about yourself. You have to share examples of yourself. You are more than just your resume. You are a human being that has stories that led up to your resume or the results of your resume. But you are more than just an accolade. You're more than just grad degree. You're more than just previous CEO or previous CEO. You're more than that. So sit down, have a conversation with them, because you need to feel at ease. That's how you feel confident when it comes to just interviews. You're not there to impress them. You're there to have a conversation with them. You're there to see whether or not they're there to see whether or not you're a good fit with them, but you're also there to see whether or not they're a good fit for you. Because ideally, I'm not your dad, but I'm trying to tell you, I don't want you to be invested in a job that is just extremely detrimental to your mental well-being and may possibly your physical health. There are a lot of jobs out there. Well, it depends on where you live, right? I do want to preface that. But there are jobs out there. Some you might not love, some you love, but they might not pay that well. But it's one of those things they need to take in consideration. But when it comes to the interview itself, again, they're there to get to know you. They're there to see whether you're a good fit, but you are also there for a reason too. And it's more than just a job. If you're qualified and if you're smart and you're bright, you know that you have a lot of options, and you should know that. And if you don't know that, keep applying to jobs and build your confidence and build your qualifications so you can understand, like, I have options. I'm really fucking smart. I work really fucking hard, and I am better than this. And that's one of those things that you need to earn for yourself. But number 2, have a conversation with the interviewer. Breathe. Again, you're there to get to know them too. You're there to understand whether or not their culture is something that you want to be a part of. And this is very important because I've been very fortunate. All my interviewers I've known before I've actually went into the interview. So simply put, all my jobs that's been offered to me has been by a friend. And why? Because I invest my time and energy to get to know people. And when those friends succeeded and got into awesome positions, they wanted to bring me on board because I've had those conversations built, because I've spent time to get to know them as individuals before their position. And this has always helped me out. I've been very, very fortunate to been offered great positions that I didn't even want. Like, to be honest, I never really dreamt of being a professor. It was just one of those things that was given to me, or that was offered to me because of those emotional bonds, those conversations I had with my former coaches and professors before I ever followed or pursued this path to become a professor. But for you, again, not everyone has been not everyone has the communication confidence that I have, but that's because I worked on it. But I'm trying to tell you that you can get there too. Okay, so hopefully I'm not rambling too much, but nonetheless, let's move on to the last tip. Last tip: have personal stories. Have canned personal stories in your mind. Because when you think about job interviews, they're more or less asking you all the same questions. They might word the questions differently depending on the demographics that they serve, the consumers they serve, whatever it may be. They might word the questions differently, but they're all pretty much asking for the same answer. For example, tell me about yourself. You might not get asked that correct quote. You might not get asked that question verbatim, tell me about yourself, but more or less that's what they want to hear. That's the answer they want. They want to get to know you. They need to get to know you. If they're going to invest 6 figures into you, they need to trust you. So, how do you prepare and feel confident going to your job interview? Understand what questions will be asked, prepare those responses, and those responses should be stories that show and reinforce your great qualities. What are your greatest strengths? My greatest strength is my work ethic. After that, tell a story. And again, that story that you share, You can use it for pretty much every job interview, and not just job interviews. You can probably use that same personal story when you go on dates, when you're meeting people for the first time, when you're networking at professional events. These stories that you tell won't change. Why? Because they're your personal stories. You're not rewriting a novel. This is a memoir. These stories stay intact. And that's one thing a lot of people, I guess, don't observe. Because I'm a communication professor, one of the things I love is I love studying words and response, just communication. And one thing that I've noticed just from my experience thus far is that when it comes to communication, we all have the answers already to so many questions. And these answers can be used over and over and over and over again for so many different speaking situations. Now, let's say one of the most difficult things you did ever was when you did cheerleading. That's just an example. Let's say one of the most difficult things you've ever done in your life was being the main cheerleader of your high school's team. Now, that story of how you became the head captain of that cheerleading squad, that story is never going to change. That's your story. But that story of how you became the captain, your drive and motivation to get to that point to become captain, you can use for multiple situations. That answer, that response, again, think about how many questions you can answer with just that cheerleading story. That could probably be a lot. What are your greatest strengths? It was my work ethic when I became the captain of my cheerleader. What were your greatest weakness? It was when I was a captain as a cheerleader. I had one of the biggest difficulties I had was that I was very focused on my own thing. And I knew at first I was a captain, I was so focused on being a national champion, but one thing I didn't realize or understand was when I was a captain in high school was that a lot of my other cheerleaders, they were going through so many different personal problems. And one of my greatest weaknesses is sometimes that I get so consumed on about the goal that I forget to stop, pause, and focus on everyone around me. Or something like that, right? But again, these personal stories that you have, you can use them over and over and over again. Because that's what communication is. Think about your favorite company. Do they have a slogan? Do they reuse that slogan? Do they have a story that they tell? Do they retell that story? Do they tweak the story a little bit, but more or less it's the same story? The answer is yes. And the same thing applies to you. You have so many stories. You have so many personal examples. Use them. And use them for the appropriate situation. And going to a job interview, very simple. You're going in there, having a conversation with people. If they like you and they want you, great. I want and like you too. Let's work together. But if you go into a job interview, you don't like them, I don't like you, or they don't like you and you don't like them, that's great too. Let's find someone else who will like and appreciate what I have to offer. Job interviews, it's like a casual get-together. It's a professional date. We're just seeing if we vibe together, okay? But in the end, you need to build that confidence. Because again, for the most part, I would not be surprised. You are extremely qualified. I'm speaking to people who remind me of my friend. You all are extremely qualified. You work extremely hard. But I also know the reality is that a lot of you don't get hired. And a lot of you actually don't get hired, but you might even be more qualified than the person who does. And I wouldn't be surprised that one of the main reasons you don't get qualified is because of the interview itself. It's because you don't share about yourself. You don't know how to share about yourself. But that is a simple problem that can be fixed. Sit down, Write your own little mini memoir, right? Of different stages, of different chapters of your life. Talk about the ups, the downs, the rewards, things you're proud of, things you're disappointed in. Write those down. Now you have so many different answers, so many different chapters to your life. And these chapters, they can be used to share to people who ask you questions. And interviews, they shouldn't be that difficult. And I don't want them to be that difficult for you. So, relax, breathe, go in prepared, and I know you are. If you're willing to listen to a podcast about interview tips, I'm sure that you're one of those people who work hard. You're probably a high performer. So I'm talking to you all. Just again, don't have so much pressure. And also don't be desperate. Have a conversation. And if you're not sure whether your responses are sufficient, ask your friends. Practice with your friends. Have them ask you a question. You provide them with a response that you have prepared. Try to make that response as natural as possible. And again, you don't need to say a word for word or verbatim. Just talk about yourself. And if the interviewer doesn't like you, okay, that's cool. At least you know. And you can both move on. Right? Okay. So this is another lesson. Sorry, it was a little too long. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little thirsty, so I'm gonna stop this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. If you would like a copy of my public speaking book, again, feel free to email me. But until next time, take care, everyone. This concludes our lesson for today. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at prof.brianhy@gmail.com. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day.